platforms right now. So, ladies and gentlemen, ghosts and goblins, witches and wizards, vampires and werewolves, this is going to be episodes 11 and 12 of The Last Drive-In, Season 4 with Joe Bob. We are almost finished with Season 4. On episodes 11 and 12 tonight, Joe Bob going to be talking about the movies Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, and Contamination. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you for joining me here tonight. I appreciate you being here, hanging out, checking out some Joe Bob Last Drive-In. And let's get right into it. So, after we watch 11 and 12 tonight, then we just have to do 13 and 14, and then 15, 16, and 17 episodes of The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob. We will cover in one extravaganza for the final episode, 3 watch-alongs for the final episode.
All right, people, this is kind of a special event tonight, going from the Goofy, the greatest werewolf movie ever made in Regina, Saskatchewan, to the showcasing of one of the greatest social realism horror movies ever made. And the only reason it doesn't turn up on many of our top 10 lists is that it's also one of the most disturbing and hard to watch horror movies ever made. In fact, it's not quite a horror movie, as the title implies. It's called Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, and it's more of a portrait than your traditional 3-act action flick, so it's more like a French art film. When it was first screened in the late 80s, though, people literally fled from the theater. It was that emotionally powerful. Everybody always says Henry's like a documentary. It's like documentary realism. Well, there's a name for that, and it's cinema verite. And if you were thinking you were about to watch a horror movie and you weren't used to cinema verite, then you might just think you're watching something actually made by a sociopathic killer. Fortunately, we have that sociopathic killer with us here tonight, John McNaughton, the director and producer and co-writer of the film, a man who grew up on the mean streets of the south side of Chicago. And unlike most film directors who make movies about criminals, John actually knew many of the most notorious criminals of the Roseland neighborhood, which is about as far south side as you can get. If you go any farther, that's not even Chicago anymore. And to Roseland is considered one of the most notorious crime-ridden, gang-ridden enclaves of Chicago. Anyway, we'll be talking to John later on tonight, but this movie is famous for many reasons, including the fact that it was the first movie ever banned by the MPAA. I mean, they didn't have the legal authority to outright ban it, but they said, we don't care what you do to it, we don't care what movie, it's going to stay an X-rated movie, and if you had an X rating, no theater would play the movie. No newspaper, radio station, or TV station to take your advertising. So you were essentially banned. I don't remember exactly how I saw this movie the first time, but copies of it were circulating. And so I wrote a syndicated newspaper column about it around December of 1988. It wasn't released until 2 years later, and it was a very limited release. But this was one of those movies you had to dig out of the underground to get even a glimpse of it. And it was based on the real-life exploits of Henry Lee Lucas, the Texas serial killer, and his sidekick, Otis Toole. There were a couple of twisted deviants who became notorious after Henry Lee was arrested in 1983, and then he proceeded to confess to about 360 murders, both before and after getting the death penalty in 1987. He was only tried for 11 of those murders, but my colleague, Hugh Ainsworth, at the Dallas Times-Herald, went through all the confessions, and he proved that Henry Lee couldn't have committed 360 murders because he would have had to have been in different cities hundreds of miles apart on the same day. So what was happening is Henry Lee was just trying to have a little fun with the Texas Rangers and make sure he always had a TV in his cell by confessing to whatever they stuck in front of him. And we know he did kill his mama and probably a dozen or so other people. But it's like people were disappointed when they found out, oh, Henry Lee really didn't kill 360 people? Oh. Anyway, he died in prison. He died in failure in 2001. And his sidekick, Otis, who in many ways was more screwed up than Henry, died in prison in 1996 of cirrhosis of the liver, which will make a lot of sense when you see this movie. All right, we'll ask John about the differences between the real Henry and the fictional Henry once he gets out here. But in the meantime, I want to talk about just the movie itself. You know, I've been at this for a while now. I've probably witnessed 157,000 movie murders by 15,000 froth-mouthed maniacs, and I have never, ever in my life seen a mass murdering maniac as scary as the one in Henry. But when I first saw it, my greatest fear was that the movie would never be. Because the Jack Valenti Honor Society censorship board out there in LA gave the movie an X rating. It didn't get an X for sex, it didn't get an X for language, it didn't get an X for nudity or transvestites hacking each other's heads off. Nope. The 7 members of the censorship board gave it an X for disturbing moral tone, which is like saying we don't know exactly why we hate it so much, we just hate it. And so that means theaters in America wouldn't show it. Even though it had been to film festivals, even though the distributors had been trying to get it shown for 3 years, even though the acting by Michael Rooker as Henry was so good, he became a highly paid Hollywood supporting actor and eventually a minor star in projects like The Walking Dead, Guardians of the Galaxy. And John McNaughton's only mistake when he made it is he based it on real life. He showed a serial killer getting away with it. So there was no Charles Bronson guy out there dedicated to hunting him down. There was no smear on his lips indicating that he was one mean dude. Henry looks like the kind of guy you can't really remember what he looks like. Drives a beat-up green sedan, favors a ratty-looking windbreaker. He's fairly clean-cut, very polite, soft-spoken, gentle, and he calmly explains getting caught is you never kill the same way twice. One day you use a gun, the next day a lead pipe. Sometimes you chop up the body, sometimes you don't, but you never ever do the same thing twice. And you don't kill people you know or you've ever been seen with. Once you know this, you're home free. And he's not quite wrong on how that would work, but he doesn't stop there. This movie gets so far inside the head of Henry, the gentle serial killer, you start to understand just exactly what it is that makes Henry kill. You know just exactly when he'll need to kill again, what's likely to make him mad. And so, of course, we're getting into more of your disturbing moral tone here because Elliot Ness never shows up. Henry never botches a job because he always strikes unexpectedly. And after he's killed somebody, it only takes him about 10 seconds to figure out what his next step is. You know, pack the body in a suitcase. On this one. No, wait, better cut his head off first because the cops have never seen that one before. Long time ago, Henry killed his mama. He can't remember exactly how he killed her. Might have been with a baseball bat, might have been with a knife, might have been with a gun. Henry doesn't remember details like that anymore. All he knows is that he killed her because she used to force him to watch her have sex with strange men or force him to dress up like a girl while she had sex. And so one day he ended up in prison where he made friends with a guy named Otis, small-time drug dealer whose philosophy of life is, you want another beer? That's his philosophy. If you want to play a drinking game with this movie, down one every time Otis says, y'all want a beer? Or bring your poor brother a beer. Or I believe I'll have a beer. Every time Otis says the word beer, or actually don't do that, it's dangerous. You'll end up with Pabst Blue Ribbon poisoning or Old Milwaukee poisoning. It's Chicago, you know. They've got quick, easy access to every cheap can that ever came out of Milwaukee. So Otis and Henry end up getting a place together on the south side of Chicago. And then Otis's sister, Becky, the topless dancer, comes to live with them for a while, and eventually Henry trains Otis to enjoy murder as much as he does, and they get him a camcorder to enhance the experience, and we're getting way beyond kinky. We're getting into the mind of Ted Bundy, and it's so real, it's so logical, that the problem with coming down on this movie for a disturbing moral tone is that it's also a truthful tone. The guy that put up the money for the movie, Waleed B. Ali, said it this way. Said, what I don't know is how in Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom, a man sticks his hand into the chest cavity of another man and pulls out a bleeding, beating heart, and that movie gets a PG rating, and our movie, which refused to comment. I called him up to ask him about it, but I think we all know the answer. Drive-in discrimination, pure and simple. They didn't do that to Goodfellas. I was in a much more violent movie than this called Casino. Here's a better example. They didn't do it to
Casino, directed by Martin Scorsese, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to see Joe Bob do some acting, go watch Casino.
Total Recall. probably the most violent movie ever made. I forget how many hundreds of kills in that movie. Sailed through with an R rating, no controversy. Obviously, because it was a multi-million-dollar investment by Coralco and TriStar, whereas Henry is a $100,000 movie from Chicago by some guys who had never made a movie before. So there was absolutely no political cost to trying to wipe them off the face of the earth. And by the way, the ratings board guy in England, they actually had a real censor over there named James Furman. He was even more determined to stop the film, so they didn't see the total uncut version of Henry in London for 20 years. I like what Joe said about this film. You guys know Joe Coleman? He's a painter. Used to be a punk rocker, lived East Village, New York. He did a show one time where he played a character called Professor Mambuzo, and he would set himself on fire and bite the heads off mice. He got arrested one time for swallowing the head of a mouse. I guess you can bite, but you can't swallow. Anyway, Joe Coleman did a poster for Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. I'll have to ask John what the poster was. Has zero marketing value. But Joe is known for his interest in the macabre and the strange. And he said, when you walk out of the theater after watching Henry, you feel like you've picked up a disease that you can't be cured of. All right, let's look at those drive-in totals and get to it. We have 14 dead bodies, 2 breasts, multiple neck snapping, rat tail comb through the eyeball, head carving, TV screen kicking, soldering iron through the hand, gratuitous cockroach spraying, Coke bottle foo, wine bottle foo, TV to the head foo, camcorder foo. Drive-In Academy Award nominations for Tom Tolles as Otis for saying, I'd like to kill somebody. And you want a beer? Tracy Arnold as Becky, the upwardly mobile topless dancer turned shampoo girl. Michael Rooker as Henry for saying, guns are easy to get. I can make a phone call and get a gun. Anybody can get a gun, Otis. And, oh yeah, that's right, I stabbed her. And John McNaughton, the director, co-writer, and co-producer for one of the great exchanges in movie history, when Otis says, where are you going? And Henry answers, nowhere. You want to come? 4 stars. Joe Bob says, check it out.
4 stars, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer.
One reason I wanted to have John on tonight is we were recently at one of those horror conventions together, and our tables were side by side, and John told me a bunch of great stories. But the convention was at this place called Wild West City, which is a replica Western town in New Jersey, like way out in the middle of nowhere, New Jersey. And they reenact the gunfight at the OK Corral several times a day. And usually when I go to a convention and I have my boa constrictor boots on and my Stetson with a nice crease in it and a lot of turquoise on the bolo, I'm the weirdo cowboy sitting over next to Kane Hodder, right? At this place, I was underdressed. There were dozens of cowboys in full bore riding apparel, like they were getting ready to shoot the Wild Bunch or Tombstone out there in New Jersey. And Kevin Van Hentenryck was there too, you know, the star of Basket Case turned sculptor. He's a big deal sculptor today. So I'm trying to get my bearings. Where are we, John? What is this place? And John, he's completely unfazed. And you know why? He used to work in a carnival, traveling carnival. He was a carny. He expects to see people dressed up like the Electric Cowboy wherever he goes. He's known strippers who work in tents on the Midway. He's been on a first-name basis with freaks in freak shows. You kind of can't do anything to amaze him. But, one other thing. Oh, I got to tell you this before you watch the movie. Imagine if you don't know what this film theater and the lights go down and the first thing you see is a black screen with some white titles on it. So you've seen nothing of the movie yet, and you hear these 2 bass drum beats. Some say it's a timpani. I think it's a bass drum. And those 2 notes, the first 4 seconds of the film, make you go. And then there's a pause, and you hear the same 2 notes again. And then the single word comes up on the screen, Henry. And you hear this 6-note piano theme, and it's all 1 finger on the right hand. It's all up here in the skinny keys. It's really high. It's the opposite of the 2 bass drum hits. And that piano theme just runs up your spine like a firecracker fuse. And then they do it again. And underneath it, there's this subwoofer hum of some double basses or cellos or something. So by the time you see the first image of the film, which, by the way, is an image taken directly from police crime scene photographs, by the time you see that image, you're already thinking, We are going to hell. Hell. And they are. And this is all in the titles. I'm just saying, pay attention, because it also has one of the greatest musical scores in the history of horror.
All right. First segment break. 26 minutes. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer.
The star of these opening scenes, in my opinion, is that apartment. You can feel mold spores forming in your lungs just by watching these people talking in that apartment. And Henry can't remember exactly shot her, because by this time in his life, he's killed her over and over again, hadn't he? When this movie was first seen in the late 80s, people assumed these were non-actors or amateur actors who were playing characters pretty close to their own real-life personalities. The opposite is the case. Michael Rooker, who plays Henry, was a graduate of the famous Goodman School of Drama. Tom Towles as Otis and Tracy Arnold as Becky were both regulars at Chicago's Organic Theater, which had launched David Mamet's career, and both had worked with Stuart Gordon, Stuart being best known to this crowd as the director of Reanimator. These were actors who showed up at a casting call organized by John McNaughton, the director who had gone to art school at Columbia College, and who was making his first film with a $100,000 budget. They shot it in 28 days, guerrilla style, on the streets of Chicago, kind of making up shots as they went. And the idea was to break the rules of traditional horror. Violence is not nice. Let's not make it fun. Let's show how horrible it is. And serial killers don't look like Freddy Krueger. They look like janitors and gas station attendants. And abused redneck girls with chopped off blonde hair don't have a lot of choices in life, so let's show why they might tend to look at stone cold killers as possible saviors. Everything about the story is totally mundane, almost stultifyingly boring, from playing cards to watching TV to talking about having beers, because in the background, we know what's out there. That woman in the opening image, she's the Henry Lee Lucas victim who was never identified. In police reports, they called her Orange Socks, because that's all she had on when she was found. And the woman in the toilet with a bottle down her throat. And the woman who makes the mistake of going to the same mall where Henry has parked his car. Everything was shot in 16 millimeter, without any fancy tints, without any special lenses, as though to say, you want to see what the life of a killer looks like? Linoleum, bad refrigerators, old sofas, cheap radios with a lot of crackly static over the pop rock songs. And it actually looks a lot like this set. You know? But Henry and Otis, as I said earlier, are based on two real-life killers named Henry and Otis. But lots of the biographical detail is switched. Things that happened to Otis in childhood are switched to Henry and vice versa. And the Becky character, who was also part of the real life story, she was just 12 when she became Henry's girlfriend. John McNaughton was asked in an interview one time why he didn't go ahead and make her 12. And you would expect him to say, well, we didn't want to cross that line. But his answer was, well, we were low budget. We wouldn't have been able to work with a child actress because of the union rules about limited working hours and having a tutor on the set. In other words, yeah, they would have crossed that line. There wasn't any line they wouldn't cross. As we'll soon find out. Back to the movie. And by the way, that wouldn't have been the first movie with a 12-year-old in a sexual role. There was a movie made in 1938 called Child Bride, and it starred an actual child bride who was 12 years old, and she does an extended nude scene. The movie was filmed in the Ozarks. It was promoted for years by the legendary Kroger Babb, who went from town to town marketing it as an educational film, warning against the dangers of hillbillies taking child brides. Because danger we should all be vigilant about. The movie is an obvious violation of child pornography laws, and yet you can see it in the Library of Congress, which means it's online, which means the Librarian of Congress is the nation's chief pornographer. Just saying, since we're going to be talking about
Jesus.
later on.
All right, next segment break, 38 minutes.
I call this second sequence of scenes the education of Otis, because once Otis takes the prize and then he becomes relaxed enough to have another beer, he's done. He's decided that this is his life now. He's become Henry's wife. There was actually some evidence that the real Henry and Otis had been lovers in prison. And John McNaughton could have taken it in that direction at this point, and he actually did shoot a scene where they sort of reversed their perverted prison ways. But he ultimately cut it out because it didn't read true for either of the characters, especially after Henry upbraids Otis for trying to fondle his own sister. At any rate, the co-star of The Education of Otis is the neon lights of downtown Chicago at night, obviously photographed with a lot of love, and you'll understand why when you meet our special guest, John McNaughton himself, the demented reprobate who co-wrote and directed one of the most controversial films in, I guess, in film history. So welcome, John. I haven't seen you since we had adjoining autograph tables. Empty adjoining autograph tables at Wild West City, somewhere in the woods of northwestern New Jersey.
Famous for their cowboys.
All right, too extreme for the art house crowd, too arty for the exploitation crowd. How many times have you heard that?
Oh, many.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I have to say that, we got tagged with that, and I understand that. We, as I say, I grew up watching European art films along with, the horror films of that would be on Midnight Movie on Saturday night.
So tell me, is it an exploitation film or an art film or some kind of accident of history that combines both?
It's a mashup.
Okay.
The modern artists of the post-war period in America were always combining high culture with low culture. Andy Warhol with pop art and stuff,
right.
and it's kind of in that.
It is in that space,
idea,
yeah. All right. Well, before we get too deep into Henry itself, it's obvious to me that you love the nighttime. You love the dark. You love the sleaze of the darkness, and you grew up in a rough neighborhood that was not unacquainted with the ways of thieves and whores and con men and pimps and gangsters on the fringes of society who hung out on streets just like the one where Henry and Otis pick up those hookers.
Absolutely.
When you grew up in Roseland, did you have to fight?
Well, it was that post-war prosperity. So, my parents' generation absolutely had a fight. But we all got, if you grew up in that neighborhood, it's funny when I work with actors, it's like, hey, I often ask them, have you ever been in a real fight? Because most of them haven't,
Right. Well, sex and violence, I think all the best movies are about sex and violence. But if you hate the movie, you call it sex and violence. If you like the movie, you call it romance and adventure, But this movie pares down sex and violence to its essentials, and because the sex is kind of violent and the violence is about sex. And would you agree with that?
To a degree. I mean, Henry had had a messed up childhood and a fixation on his mother, and that just destroyed any ability of him to have a normal sexual relationship with a woman.
Right. One thing I forgot to ask you when we were talking in New Jersey, you were all over Chicago in the 60s and 70s. Did you ever run into Herschel Gordon Lewis?
No, I did not.
You never met him?
No, never met him.
I thought he could have been a great filmmaker if he just let somebody else. He was a great producer and promoter, but he's a terrible writer-director. You, on the other hand, when you started this project, you said, well, I need writing help. And so you hired the great Richard Fire to work with you on the screenplay. How was that? How did that collaboration work?
Well, we had a blast. Richard was really crazy. He left us a couple years ago. He'd been working with Stuart Gordon in the Organic Theater. But Richard was an actor, a writer. He was also a great piano player. And we wrote it at his apartment in Chicago. And we just had a blast.
I heard you say one time he was more the arty guy, and you were more the exploitation guy.
And we made a great pair.
And so you worked together on the lines and the.
Richard at first didn't want his name. He said, "I don't know if I want my name on this." I'm fine. Then I'll take full credit. But and in the end, it became the thing that he's remembered for. So.
Yeah. All right, let's do this. I'm going to run down your resume. Okay. Stop me if I get one of these jobs wrong. Bartender.
Yeah, my cousin's bar in the south suburbs of Chicago.
Delivery man.
I delivered the audiovisual equipment for the MPI, which is the company that would eventually. That's how I met them. They would eventually fund Henry.
Carnival roustabout.
Yeah, and again, when I finished the carnival, I wound up here in Fort Worth for a couple of weeks.
Oh, really?
With the Eubanks brothers, who were carnies with me, and were two of the roughest, toughest characters I've ever known, and we had a lot of fun together.
Jewelry maker?
Yep, in New Orleans. I made custom jewelry in the French Quarter and worked with some really fun people.
Shipbuilder?
In New Orleans, I built racing sailboats for a guy named Tommy Dreyfus and a company called New Orleans Marine. I mean, we built big ocean racers.
Okay. Advertising agency involved with the Dairy Queen account for the Belt Buster. People here know what the Belt Buster is.
Well, there was Dairy Queen. I mean, they had two accounts: Dairy Queen, which was for 49 states, and Dairy Queen of Texas, which was a separate account because it was a different market. And so Belt Buster was formulated for the Texas market.
Assembly line in a tractor factory.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was when I got out of college with my degree in television production and still photography. There were no jobs. It was a recession. Pretty much everyone in my family, including my mother during the war, had worked for the International Harvester Tractor Factory at 119th and Halsted on the south side of Chicago. So,
wow. And then all of that experience leads to being the director of Wild Things, Mad Dog and Glory, The Borrower, The Harvest, many other projects for television and film. Soon to be directing, you told me, in New Jersey, A Good Man Is Hard to Find, based on the Flannery O'Connor story.
Hopefully.
Okay, well, the reason the Flannery O'Connor story interested me is that's a very Southern story. You're a very Northern guy, but I don't think you'll have any trouble with it. And because this movie, all of these characters read Southern to me.
Oh,
I mean, they're in Chicago.
Yeah.
But they're somehow Texas rednecks trapped in Chicago or something.
I spent 2 weeks every summer of from the time I was 10 to the time I was 18 in Hot Springs, Arkansas.
You know why that makes sense is Al Capone loved Hot Springs, Arkansas.
Oh,
the ultimate Chicago gangster goes down to Hot Springs, Arkansas and does illegal gambling down there.
Yeah, that became a mob town.
All right, John, stick around. I've got lots more questions as Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer really starts to heat up. So roll the film. How many people did the real Henry Lee Lucas kill?
Nobody knows. He claimed 350, and the police bought it.
Okay.
But then as time went on, it shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. And I know a particular writer in New York, who hates Henry and has written a lot of bad things about it. And he said, well, none of it's true. It's like, I don't care. But you could, when I saw the real Henry, you could believe it was true. And that made for our screenplay. We know he killed his mother. Yeah. That's a fact. And after that, it's kind of downhill.
Well, I mean, he got the death.
Yeah, he killed a few people. And Tracy Arnold who plays Becky, is from Texas and right now lives in Houston directing theater. She was from a town where somebody she knew was supposedly killed by Henry.
Wow.
The real Henry.
Is it true that Vestron Video refused to distribute the film because you used the real names, Henry and Otis, and they were afraid Henry and Otis would sue them?
Which is impossible because they were convicted of those crimes. That's what they said, but I found out years later from somebody that worked at Vestron, they were just afraid of it.
Yeah,
and they used that as their excuse.
Henry Lee Lucas at that point was in the Ellis unit of the Texas Department of Corrections in Huntsville, and I've been to the Ellis unit of the TDC, and assuming you could find some jailhouse lawyer who would agree to write up the lawsuit in your suit against Vestron Video, you'd probably accept payment in the form of 20 rapes and all your commissary for a year and your shoes. So nobody in the Ellis unit was going to be suing anybody.
No,
So that's insane.
If you are convicted of the crime and it's in the news, you have no grounds for a lawsuit.
That's like saying we better not make a movie about Charlie Manson while he's alive because you never know what legal muscle he has.
Next segment break, 57 minutes.
In my opinion, the most chilling single shot of the film is the one we just saw, and I do not mean the torture of the mom by Otis, and I don't mean Young Boy by Henry, and I don't mean the almost unbearable sounds of that home invasion, including the sounds of the husband rolling around on the floor with a bag over his head. The most chilling single shot, beautifully photographed, is that slow pan to Otis and Henry slouched on the sofa, their attention riveted on that video, mesmerized by the video, and yet their bodies being completely relaxed. You know how they always say if you want to see who's the greatest actor and who's the common actor, watch them when they're not talking, watch them when all they have to work with is their reactions. That slow pan is so shocking that it makes the audience feel complicit in the murders. So, John, you're an evil man.
Well, interestingly, when we actually shot that, I mean, Michael shot it on the home video camera, and Charlie Lieberman stood behind it. So when the kid comes in the door, it supposedly drops the camera. Charlie Lieberman, the cinematographer, grabbed the camera, flipped it over, and laid it on the ground, aiming at an angle that would continue to capture me. But when it was over, I just looked at the crew of the people in the room and I said, none of us are going to heaven.
Right before that, you had the notorious scene where they go to buy the TV set. and the black market salesman gets gruff with the wrong guys, and sort of the yin and the yang of the Otis Henry crime spree, because one guy seems almost to deserve killing, and one entire family obviously does not deserve killing.
Well, that was the intent. I mean, we're trying to have something to say about using violence for entertainment. And normally at the time, there were like Rambo pictures and that. And, Rambo would go out. He'd been wronged. These bad people were making his life hell. And you'd set up a character to be evil. And then the audience would go, kill him. We want to see it. And so we go with the guy who gets the TV array. He insults them. He
Right.
gives them a bad time. And he's rather, you just kill him, Henry, kill him.
Yeah,
Which
and
they do.
Right, is one of the biggest video pirates of the
42 felony.
Character of Becky, played by Tracy Arnold. Two scenes in particular. One is the scene where she wants to show off the I Love Chicago t-shirt that she bought that day in some souvenir shop. Something about that whole scene is just heartbreaking to me, how proud she is of that t-shirt. And then the other one is when she dances with Henry while Otis is running the camcorder. And she seems so happy, like she's trying to find some way to enjoy life. And yet we know that she has a husband and a daughter somewhere that are waiting for her to come home. So kind of a very complex, tragic character, and you don't realize it at first.
She was a wonderful actress. And it was, again, when I got it, this was my first film. So I was thinking, I'm going to love all the blood and guts stuff and all that, and the acting stuff. But it turned out that what I found that I really loved was with two people talking to each other and really saying something that gets to you when you see it. And I loved, my favorite scene is when they're playing cards and they start opening up to each other. And they had both such tragedies, such walking tragedies. That scene I can watch over. They were so good.
Yeah, well, that kind of goes with you being the exploitation guy and Richard Fire being the art film guy. Since we just watched the home invasion scene, I guess that's really the main scene that the censors went to town on. But the initial reason that the movie was held out of distribution for so long had nothing to do with censorship. It was because your own producer didn't really like the film, right?
They were shocked by it. They wanted just gory exploitation. They said, John, what have you done? This is an art film. And it's like they had just taken a mouthful of dog poop when they said art film.
Yeah.
So they weren't happy with it in the beginning.
But after you sort of convinced them to let you take it out, you start trying to get it seen, and Vestron says they might release it, but then they back out. Atlantic Releasing wants to do it, but then it gets the X from the MPAA, so they back out of that deal. You start showing it at film festivals, and you finally get some attention. I saw it in late 1988, even though the official release, the release date is, I think, 1990.
Yeah, in Boston.
Yeah, but it had been at the Chicago Film Festival, I know. I'd been at a little festival in Brooklyn. And then I think really, I don't know if I give credit, but I think Errol Morris, the documentary guy, the weird documentary guy, was on the selection board at the Telluride Film Festival in Colorado. And that's when it sort of broke out. So, but that still means you were 4 years waiting for a release for the movie.
Yeah. Without income for most of it. I went 18 months without income after the movie was finished.
Wow.
I was living in my cousin's house on credit cards, and he was letting me live there for free. It was a tough time until finally, it broke through the ice, and then I got an agent, I got a career.
Well, then you went through the same thing in London with the British Board of Film Classification blocking the release,
they cut it.
Insisting on many cuts until it was finally kind of unrecognizable over there. And your film actually was the major reason that the MPAA got rid of the X rating entirely and switched over to NC-17. Does NC-17 really make anything better?
Because at the time, the majority of films were being showed in malls, shopping mall multiplexes, and the NC-17. The owners of the malls didn't want it's adult content. We're family malls. We don't want that stuff shown here. You call it X, call it NC-17, so it still reduced your profitability by about 95% in theatrical. Yeah.
Were you active in all those censorship fights with the MPAA?
I just had a conversation with the lady at the MPAA, and you ask them, what can we cut? And they tell you, because they're not a censorship organization, they're a trade organization. They say, we can't tell you what to cut, but we have a problem with this scene. So what should I do? can't tell you what you should do, but you could change it and then send it back to us. But with Henry, the lady just said, Mr. McNaughton, I said, so what should we cut? And she goes, Mr. McNaughton, in my opinion, there's nothing you can cut. We object to the overall moral tone of this movie, which
that's harsh. That's harsh.
But it meant, and from my point of view, it never was cut. It's never been cut. And the original cut is the cut you'll get if you buy it today.
Right. After the film was acclaimed all over the world, the current owners of MPI resubmitted it for classification very recently, like 2016 or something. And I'm happy to say that after intense study and reconsideration, the MPAA still gave it an NC-17. They will never like this film, and I think you should be proud of that.
I am. Believe me, I am. I was happy when I heard that. Again, there was a 30th anniversary re-release. And it went. I was doing screenings in New York, LA, Chicago, et cetera, and they wanted to get the rating changed, and that's when that happened. They resubmitted, and they said nope, because in Britain they finally relented, and then now in the UK you can get the full original version.
Well, just when you think the lives of these characters can't get any worse, you take it to a new level. So let's get back to the film. You mentioned this before, and I didn't know whether it was a myth or a true story, but the woman in the home invasion scene was so traumatized she had to go to the hospital. And I heard her talk about it, and she didn't quite, she sort of said, well, I don't know why they took me to the hospital. I didn't really have to go to the hospital, but apparently the people that saw her.
I remember her sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, just like this, and she was traumatized. But every Christmas I hear from her, she's cool with it.
Okay.
She said she hurt her neck in the struggle, but I don't know. She perhaps did hurt her neck, but it just was like, I think she was traumatized.
But the young boy in the scene, he was okay with it?
He was, who works as my assistant, Anita, that's her son. A lot of people in day player roles in the thing were friends.
Okay.
They weren't real actors, and he wasn't a real actor. He was just a kid.
So he felt like his mom was there, and there was no problem. Well, all right. So, I don't know what you would say to these new actors. Welcome, guys. You're the family that's going to get tortured and killed by the stars of the movie. And also, I wanted to ask you about this. Didn't you have a close friend who played 3 of the female
Mary
victims?
Demas. She played the very first one that the film opened.
The opening image.
Yeah, she played the hooker. She plays the gal with a bottle in her face.
Okay.
And then in a blonde wig, she plays one of the 2 hookers in the car when they snap their necks.
Oh, okay. Everybody gets tortured during the making of Henry.
Next segment break, 1 hour and 6 minutes.
How about getting your poor old brother beer? One interesting thing Tom Tolles did to get into character for that role is he had somebody make him 2 fake front teeth to get that jagged tooth look, and something about that physicality was enormously helpful in defining Otis for him. One thing all the actors said is that they were amazed how much you trusted them and how much freedom you gave them. Is that something you always do with actors?
Well, at that time, I didn't know what to do with actors, so I just let them. I knew they were good, but we were. I think again, young filmmakers rehearse, and we rehearsed for 2 weeks. And Richard Fire and myself and the actors. Richard, being from the theater, after our first meeting with the actors, with the 3 main actors, said, "Okay, you go home tonight and write your character biographies." And Tommy and Tracy, who were more theater bound, did, and a lot of the stuff they wrote got inserted as their dialogue. Michael Rooker thought, this was beneath, so he went and he actually while he was sitting on the toilet, read his character bio into a recorder. But from each one of those character bios, we took dialogue and stuff and wove it back in. So if you rehearse with your actors and you have the writer in the rehearsal, whatever problems they're having with their dialogue and their character, if you open the doors and say, change whatever you want, you've got a mess. You let, the horses, the writer there, and, I have a problem. My character wouldn't say it this way. Now that I've observed, well, there's the writer. You guys work it out. So we completely rewrote the script based on the work we were doing. And by the time we got there, they knew who they were. They knew the scenes were set, and we just shot them.
Yeah, I've seen that time and again, where if you take a week to do the rehearsal, the movie turns out 1,000, and and not so much because of the individual performances, but because there then becomes this group acting style.
You're all in the same movie.
Yeah. Well, since you've worked with some of the top names, Bill Murray, Robert De Niro, Matt Dillon, Kevin Bacon, which do you prefer? The small indie working environment or the big budget projects? I know you prefer the big check, but which working environment do you prefer?
I like both because, like Wild Things where we had a lot of money. Oh, I need the techno crane, and I need, we're gonna go out and shoot on the water, which, on a 90-foot sailboat with 5 other boats that are serving and running the actors and running equipment. And, it's costing $200,000 a day to do that. And say, yeah, no problem. But you've got a studio to answer to, and they're going to, straitjacket you in some ways, although they were pretty cool on Wild Things.
Wild Things is one of the greatest movies of the 90s, in my opinion. Retrospective screenings of Wild Things, and people are always just amazed, but mainly because they've never seen a movie that twists that many ways, that many times.
It was a great script. So, but in the littler movies, the small and indie movies, I mean, like with Henry, there was nobody telling us we couldn't do this or couldn't do. Screening we had at the Ali Brothers. There was a producer, a friend of mine, Billy Horberg, who he's now the president of the American Producers Association, and he produced a lot of big movies, and we've known him, came from Chicago. But when the movie ended, Henry ended, and the lights came up, and I went, "Hey, Billy," I invited him. How'd you like it? And he was stammering. He said, "You can't do that. You can't let him get away. He just, there's no moral." I go, "Too late."
How good is Michael Rooker?
He's very, very good. I mean, he was a kid from Jasper, Alabama, in a welfare family. I mean, he came up hard, and his parents split up. His father moved to Chicago, and I think he worked as like a gopher for the mobster somewhere in Cicero, Illinois. And Michael, when he was riding the Humboldt Park, which has now become very fashionable, but at the time was one of the leading gang enclaves of America, little Michael was riding his bike through Humboldt Park when he was 11 or 12. And that boy, so he got stabbed in the throat. Somebody just came out. So he was dyslexic, I believe, as a football star. He was very good at athletics. And he joined the theater group to overcome his dyslexia. And he fell in love with acting. And then he went and auditioned at the Goodman School of Drama, which went to DePaul University, a really good drama school, and just got a scholarship, And I mean, he was a very different type of guy than the majority of the young men that were.
Well, you could tell he kind of brought his own intensity to the part. John, I think you invented a new genre for or at least a new subgenre, something I would call horror noir, which is hard to say, but not like this. But you probably inspired films like Blair Witch and later on Hostel, where what the filmmakers think they're going for or claim they're going for is in-your-face realism. And I think it grew out of your love for the film noir of the 50s.
Yeah, like I said, when I was a kid, and I don't know why, but if there was a movie that took place all at night in big cities, and
Tarantino and filmmakers like that they pretty much, it's art copying art, and you like art copying life.
Where I grew up in the south side of Chicago, it was just so much drama happening on the streets every week, and especially on the weekends. And it just was so, I was engrossed by the craziness of life itself. And to me, it's like you could make paintings about other paintings, and that's completely okay. That's a trend in postmodern art, cinema, you name it. But I like to paint from life.
All right, John, thanks so much for being here. I hope to see you at another Wild West horror convention. No, we won't do that again. But in the meantime, we're going to give Henry a little ray of hope here in the concluding scenes of Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. Roll it. And I like that you use that word portrait in the name of the film. Dead giveaway that you're an art student.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to just call it Henry. And the Ali brothers said, well, we're going to be selling this in video, and all the buyers, they just get a sheet of paper. Henry Aldrich, Henry the Eighth, Henry the Fifth, and you can't just have Henry. You got to have a descriptive. So we called it Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer.
But it's not rise and fall of a serial killer
No.
like it would normally be, or Savage Henry, or the story of Henry. It's just Henry. Here he is. Take him or leave him. We don't have an opinion about him. You decide. And I think it's that aspect of it that just drove people crazy.
Well, I hope that people will come to their own conclusions. I don't like to spoon feed them their moral decisions.
Okay.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is after the end credits. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer.
Yeah, well, you can see why when this movie was shown at film festivals, people just sort of sat there in stunned silence. And then the announcement would be made, the filmmakers are here with us tonight. And the guy people were especially interested in was Tom Tolles, the guy who played Otis, because he was such an articulate guy. It was like a relief to people that he wasn't actually Otis. Tom went on to a great character actor career. Many of you remember him from the Tom Savini Night of the Living Dead remake. If anybody saw Scarlet Diva, the autobiographical film that Asia Argento directed, she has a sequence in there about her alleged rape by Harvey Weinstein. Tom Tolles plays Harvey Weinstein, but he passed away in 2015. Tracy Arnold didn't really stick with acting. She went into other fields, social work mostly, back in her native Texas. Michael Rooker became a genuine movie star, but I still think this may be the best thing that he ever did. The scene nobody talks about is when he goes out to buy Kools at the convenience store. Now, buying the Kools reminds us of the very first scene in the movie when he buys Kools at the diner right before he kills two people. And he says, "Fuck the Bears." I always like that line. It's something you never say in Chicago, but he's saying, "Don't put me in your world." And on his way back to the apartment, he meets that woman walking her dog on a very lonely street. Easy pickings for him. And for some reason, he does not kill her. So it's like maybe Becky is rubbing off on him a little bit. Maybe there's hope. Maybe he's having a few real human feelings. And then there's the whole rape scene and the rat-tailed comb to the eye and the aftermath disposal of the body. And he's killed Becky's brother, and she knows that, but she's with him. So she's obviously the only person in the world who would never turn him in. But he's got to be thinking, will she be okay with my job, which is to kill people every day? And we know the answer to that question, even before he confirms it in that final scene, which is really the only way the movie could end. When they showed the movie at the Telluride Film Festival, a guy grabbed John McNaughton on his way out and said, "You can't do that," meaning he was violating a rule of drama by having no cops and no resolution and no justice. And there's something about it that just goes against our sense of how movies should resolve. And in my opinion, that's what makes it great. Okay, come on out, Darcy. I've known Darcy, the mail girl.
Darcy, the lovely mail girl, ladies and gentlemen.
This was probably
round of applause for Darcy.
One of your all-time favorite movies, right?
Ooh, you're right about that.
But it's still cool to have John with us.
Oh my God, it still is.
And you're a big anti-censorship person, so solidarity with that, right?
Hell yeah.
What you got for me in terms of the mail? I know we got something kind of special, right?
Okay, so first I have some gifts.
All right.
These are Texas Chainsaw handkerchiefs from Jason Bichard
Chainsaw hanky.
of Old Hickory, Tennessee.
Okay, well, that's great. And what's the story on these?
We don't know. He just sent these.
Okay.
He said he wanted you to have them.
Oh, my God. You know what? This is Cthulhu. This is the guy who did, on the night of the summer marathon, nobody could get the show, and so he did an illegal feed on Twitch and got kicked off of Twitch.
My God.
He sacrificed himself
Cthulhu
so that
rock.
everybody could see the marathon. That's great. Now he's sending us gifts. I mean, we got to do something for this guy.
That's so sweet. Okay, this is membership cards, buttons, and like other stuff from the Teenage Werewolves Horror Film Theme Club of Long Island, New York.
Okay.
And there's a letter.
Oh, okay. Bunch of stuff here. Joe Bob, thank you for all you do for horror. Your passion for the education and enjoyment of the genre has been a huge influence on our mission of saving horror one kid at a time. I don't know what that means. Our logo featuring Sally Hardesty's eyes, her look, say everything about experiencing a horror film for the first time. We'd be proud to have you amongst our ranks. Cheers to Blood, Breasts, and Beasts. Ghoulishly, Becky and Tyler. Okay, I guess I'm a member now. What exactly do they do?
We have no idea.
Okay.
I love horror films, and they have your favorite final girl on their card.
Sally from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Whatever.
Wouldn't you say she's the greatest horror heroine in history, though?
No, I would not.
Who is?
Mary Lou Maloney.
No.
Yes.
From Prom Night 2?
Exactly.
She's a monster. I mean, she's satanic.
And
she's
like
not a heroine.
Hot.
I don't think she's a heroine.
I think that depends on your point of view. I actually have her picture hanging on my bed.
You have Mary Lou Maloney's satanic picture hanging on your bed?
I really do.
Yeah, doesn't she systematically kill men?
She does indeed.
You're scaring me. Okay, we'll talk later. Did I tell you the one about the Irishman, the Italian, and the redneck?
Go for it.
This bartender is washing his glasses, and an elderly Irishman comes into the bar. Irishman has a bad leg, so with great difficulty, he hoists his leg over the bar stool, and he pulls himself up painfully, and he asks for a sip of Irish whiskey. And so the Irishman is looking down the bar, and he says, "Is that Jesus down there at the end of the bar?" And the bartender nods, "Yes,
sipping on
yes,
Jameson."
So the Irishman says, "Well, give Jesus an Irish whiskey, too."
Jameson
So next thing
whiskey
you
for
know,
the
a hunchback
Irish.
Italian comes into the bar. He's moving real slow, shuffles up to the bar stool, and he asks for a glass of Chianti. Drinking his Chianti, he looks down the bar. He says, "Is that Jesus down there?" The bartender says, "Yes." And so he says, "Well, give Jesus a glass of Chianti." Third guy to come in is a redneck. Redneck swaggers up to the bar and he says, "Hey man, set me up a cold Lone Star." And then he goes, "Hey, is that God's boy down there?" The bartender, Lone Star too. So after a while, Jesus gets up to leave. But first he walks over to the Irishman and he touches him on the leg and he says, "For your kindness, you are healed." And the Irishman feels the strength come back to his leg and he gets up and he dances a jig all the way out the door. Then Jesus walks over to the Italian and he touches his back. "For your kindness, you are healed." The Italian feels his back straighten up. He raises his hands up over his head for the first time in years, does a series of backflips all the way out the door. Jesus walks towards the redneck. Suddenly the redneck jumps away from him and says, "Don't touch me, I'm on disability."
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, ghosts and goblins, witches and wizards, vampires and werewolves, we will be right back with Season 4, Episode 12 of The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob. We are going to take a 1.5, 2-minute break, and then Joe Bob is going to talk about the movie Contamination. So we will be right back. Get yourself a snack, get yourself a drink, maybe some popcorn, maybe some ice cream. Maybe you're an Irishman. Sip some Jameson whiskey. No matter what, ladies and gentlemen, get comfortable. We will be right back. All right, ladies and gentlemen, ghosts and goblins, witches and wizards, vampires and werewolves, we are back. And we are going to finish our watch along. Joe Bob. This is season 4, episode 12. The movie is Contamination. I'll let Joe Bob take it away from here.
One reason I have hope for this country is that Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy are both produced at the same studio by the same company. So you have the stupidest people in America who can't figure out a 5-letter word when they know the first 4 letters of ZEBR. And then the smartest people in America who know the full names of 18th century Austrian composers in 1/2 of 1 second, even when the question is asked in reverse. And the two groups pass each other in the hallways of Sony Pictures in Culver City, California. And the smart people treat the stupid people like patients at the Danny Thomas Children's Hospital. And the stupid people treat the smart people like those guys at the state fair who can guess your weight within 3 pounds just by looking at you.
We definitely don't want any copyright here, so just gotta mute the audio for a second, ladies and gentlemen. And then I will unmute it when the episode continues. But thank you everybody for joining me tonight once again for another watch along here. Last Drive-In with Joe Bob, Season 4, 2019. This is episode 12, Contamination. Joe Bob just finished Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, which he describes as horror noir. I like horror movies and I like noir movies. But this is Contamination.
All right. I have a request to make. The next time I come to your town for any reason, do not take me downtown to where it used to be a slum, but now it's River Place Courtyard on the Square Plaza. I've already been to River Place Courtyard on the Square Plaza. I went to the one in St. Louis, and the one in Minneapolis, and the one in Memphis, and the one in Little Rock, and the one in Milwaukee, and the one in Atlanta. And I already bought all the magnetic silver perpetual motion satellite paperweight desk ornaments that I'll be needing for the next 70, 80 years. By the way, the movie tonight is Contamination, also called Alien Contamination, for those of you who saw it when it first came out. It's an Italian ripoff of Alien by the ripoff master, Louis Coates, known in his native country as Luigi Cozzi, but he likes to be Louis Coates in America, so we'll all think he's American. Contamination is actually pretending to be an American movie with not a single American in the cast, which is pretty amazing. But we'll talk about that in a minute. But you know what I'm talking about with these craft beer malls with the cobblestone streets? Usually starts out like this. Joe Bob, if you're not doing anything tonight, we have a bunch of people who would like to take you down to River Place Courtyard on the Square Plaza. Sounds great. What is it? Well, have you ever heard of Girardelli Square in San Francisco, or the Navy Pier in Chicago, or that place in Boston, Faneuil Hall? Yeah, I've heard of those. Well, it's like that. Well, why is it like that? Well, we built it to attract tourists back to downtown. Okay, why do you want tourists downtown? Because all the people that live here are afraid to go down there anymore. Oh, well, yeah, well, take me down there, because you're right, I'm not well informed enough to be afraid to go down there yet. So we all go down to River Place Courtyard on the Square Plaza, and the first thing we do is we ride around in a horse and buggy, and we look at the for lease signs in the windows. And the buggy driver tells colorful stories about what used to be there before they built River Place Courtyard on the Square Plaza Bank Center. And it's always B-A-N-C, French spelling of bank, C-E-N-T-R-E. French spelling of center, because if it was bank center, like in Plaza Worthy. But the driver of the horse-drawn carriage will say stuff like, Well, now, this pharmacy you see on the next block, that was once home to the Runnels Brothers drug chain. They sold out in 1944, and the building was vacant for the next 20 years. Then it was a discount men's clothing store in the 60s, and then vacant again until 19. Purchased the property and turned it back into a drugstore. Structures, and the original owners, Woodrow Wilson. And everybody goes, interesting. And next we head over to Zach's Riverside Eatery and Bistro for some mozzarella fry sticks and some barbecue blackened shrimp fajitas and some baked lobster gumbo. Yummy. And then somebody always says, be sure to save room for our sinful crepe on a stick later, but they're not finished with me. Now it's time for a relaxing ride on the Queen Bell old-timey riverboat barge. It's not until you get on the actual boat, though, that they tell you, A, it doesn't go anywhere except to the next bend in the river. B, there aren't enough plastic deck chairs. C, it takes 3 hours. And D, there's nothing to do on board except order up some Greek orange sherbet at Ye Olde Ice Cream Shoppy. And usually I'm so exhausted by having so much fun in one day that there's no time left for the multi-level downtown mall, which is full of shops that sell LeBron James workout shirts and hipster vodka and cinnamon rolls the size of Montana and bad jewelry handmade by a woman named Erica. That's Erica with a K, you know, the famous Erica of Creations by Erica. And then this always happens. They say, Joe Bob, there's one more thing that you got to do. Comedy club. We're known for our comedy clubs. We're one of the top comedy towns in America. Now, the best club is Lot of Yucks. It's over on the Old Wharf. I say, okay, well, that sounds great. Who's there tonight? Mike Manzanotti. He's there. You know, the guy from the Rip-Off Jackass show on True TV? He's been on Kimmel twice. And you know what you're really going to love? His sense of humor reminds me of you because he's such a wacky guy. Okay, people, I asked you. Come on. Am I a wacky guy? I'm not a wacky guy, am I? You don't get wacky when you watch this show, do you? But anyway, my point is I've been to River Place Courtyard on the Square Plaza, okay? I don't need to go there anymore. And speaking of ways to rip off tourists, Italy is the grand champion, right? They got stuff from 2,500 years ago that they picked up off the side of the road, and you have to pay money to see it. And by the way, that attitude manifests itself in the world of cinema. See, I always get back to the subject one way or the other. See, I'm all the way back on the subject now. The way that manifests itself is that the Italians are the masters of the universe when it comes to taking a popular movie and doing a cheap rip-off version of it. And the king of that particular con game is Louis Coates. That's his fake American name. It's really Luigi Cozzi. And we're about to watch his masterpiece rip-off of Alien. It's the sensitive story of an obnoxious Brooklyn cop who watches 4 people get their intestines exploded by green pulsating eggs left on a ship in New York Harbor, only to find himself partnered up with a no-nonsense female agent from the Pentagon and an alcoholic ex-astronaut who went crazy after returning from Mars, and the 3 of them have to investigate secret coffee plantations in America where a one-eyed mush monster eats people alive while music by Goblin plays. Sure, we've seen it before, but have we seen it with partial financing by the Cali drug cartel? I think not. We have 23 dead bodies, 1 dead rat, 1 ghost ship, 2 gun battles, 67 gallons of blood with intestine garnish, disembowelment, multiple slime-secreting giant green eggs, bullet to the forehead, freeze-dried outer space life forms, multiple New York skyline shots so you'll know this is an American movie, hazmat suits made out of bed sheets, slow-mo, polar ice cap flashback, 1 shower scene with photography from the neck up only, half-point deduction for that, 1 crash landing in the Amazon jungle, flaming neck, cop devouring, club to the cranium, flaming, whimpering cyclopean, outer space tentacled slime creature, exploding sailors, exploding naval officers, exploding law enforcement personnel, exploding Bronx warehouse personnel, exploding fair trade coffee personnel, exploding mercenary
Everything is
soldiers,
exploding in this
exploding
movie.
character actors, exploding hefty bags, exploding rat, gratuitous face slapping, gratuitous serape-clad South American parade goers, gratuitous tour of a Colombian coffee toasting oven, Phew! Kung fu, flamethrower food, machine gun food, mesmerizing Cyclops food. This movie is better than I remember it. Outer Space Ceramic Pet Carrier food. Ground-In Academy Award nominations for Siegfried Rau. He's German. As Hamilton, the turncoat astronaut in the employ of the outer space mush monster. Ian McCulloch as the astronaut who saw something on Mars. Luigi Cozzi, the director, for writing the lines, well, we might as well split up, and it's almost as if he exploded from the inside, and put emergency plan number 7 into effect, and why are you bothering to torment me? And in my medical opinion, it's possibly a giant squash, or an avocado, or some kind of mango. They just don't write them like that anymore. 2.5 stars. Joe Bob says, check it out.
2.5 stars.
You know, most directors, when they get caught ripping off something, they say, well, it was an homage. I was making a tribute to one of my favorite directors. But in Italy, they don't mess with that. They just say, yeah, we stole from that movie, and then this other movie. And when we were casting, we tried to get lookalikes for all the people who were in the big budget movie. And then we put lines in the script that were actually in the other movie. And yeah, we did our best to do a cheap version of exactly what they did. And then we tried to make people think it was a sequel. Ah, the golden days of Italian cinema. And then they have an espresso. It's always an espresso. It's not like a Starbucks espresso. It's like one of those drinks. It's like 17 Red Bulls concentrated into a shot glass. You know, charred molasses just fights its way down your throat. You throw that thing back like, hey, look at this. I'm putting toxic industrial cleaning products into my stomach and surviving. And that's why it would make sense they would go to Colombia to make this movie. Because, hey, is this where you grow the espresso beans? Can you start pumping some wood alcohol into those? We're not getting enough of a brain fry.
Personally, I hate coffee. You know me, I hate my coffee. I'm a hot chocolate kind of guy. Sipping on some Dr. Pepper tonight.
One line I'll never get tired of. Call in the flamethrowers. The flamethrower is the most cinematic weapon ever invented. I wish I owned a flamethrower. Does the Second Amendment give me the right to pack a flamethrower? I think it must. Otherwise, this wouldn't be America, would it? So here we are 29 minutes into the movie, and we're still in New York City, which is strange for an Italian flick, especially in the 70s or 80s, because normally what you do is you're in New York for about a minute, and then the rest of the movie takes place in South America, like all those Italian cannibalism movies, like Make Them Die Slowly. The New York part is just to establish that, hey, the movie is set in America, and these are American actors. Although in the case of this movie, not a single actor is American. All the characters are American, but none of the actors. And then, of course, nothing we've watched has been filmed in New York City anyway. Luigi Cozzi spent a day and a half in Manhattan shooting helicopters and cars racing through the night and the skyline from every angle he could get it. But 80% of the movie was filmed at the De Pallis studios in Rome. I mentioned De Pallis once before when we were talking about Demons. De Pallis is the film studio that got bombed to smithereens in World War II. Actually, it was American planes that bombed it. We made a boo-boo. But the Italians didn't let that bother them. They just kept filming there anyway. It's the major low-budget location for all these Italian horror films of the 70s and 80s. So those dock scenes, that's the go to the beach in the summer if you live in Rome. The warehouse in the Bronx, that's in Rome. The inside of the ship, that's in Rome. The super secret Pentagon Intelligence Center where they have hermetically sealed glass cages for people recently exposed to gooey green eggs that cause people to spontaneously explode, that's in Rome too. So a lot of you wonder, what the heck was going on in Italy during this period? There were just so many of these crappy movies. And what the heck was going on was that Italy was losing its traditional role as the center of the European film industry. Cinecittà, the studio, which was like the old MGM studios in America, which is the biggest backlot in the world, I think it still is, it was standing empty much of the time. But the reason Italy was famous in the first place is that they had mastered the art of dubbing. So you might not know that from this movie. But you could go to Rome with an international cast, have actors speaking 9 different languages, and they had resident voiceover artists who could dub that movie into all the languages of Europe. So Luigi Cozzi is not worried about having a cast that includes Germans, Brits, French Canadians, and Italians, all speaking their own language in the dialogue scenes. So two people are talking. One's talking in French, one's talking in Italian. When the movie comes out, they're both speaking English. And this was made possible by the Italian tradition of shooting without sound. And you can work a lot faster that way. And then you just drop in the sound later. And they did this with all of their films, including the films that had a 100% Italian cast. So anyway, the Italian film industry is dying because people no longer want to see Vittorio De Sica art films and Fellini and romantic comedies starring Marcello Mastroianni. And so the Italian producers look around and they say, well, what can we do now? And they decide we can rip off all the American films. We'll make them in Rome, dub them into English. No one will be the wiser. They'll look like American films now that nobody wants to watch Italian films anymore. So guys like Luigi Cozzi, the director of this film, he loves science fiction. So he goes to the producers and he says, I want to make a sci-fi film. And they go, no, that's bullshit. Nobody watches sci-fi in Italy. Sci-fi is a stupid genre. And it's kind of true because there's kind of no such thing as an Italian science fiction film. Science fiction is American, British, and Russian. It's not so popular with the French, the Spanish, the Italians, the Germans. And so Luigi says, it's not just any sci-fi film, it's a sequel to Alien. Because they would do that. They didn't care. They would write a sequel to anything. And then we'll dub it into English, and everybody will think it's really a sequel to Alien. So probably not, because have you ever felt trapped in that many exposition scenes in one movie? The investigation of the ghost ship. Whatever happened must have happened all of a sudden. Don't touch those. It could be dangerous. Oh, don't worry. Never when to worry. Anyway, then we go to the top secret Pentagon facility, which has some weird James Bond name that no American would ever use. More talky scenes about the intensive culture of unknown bacteria. Not just a culture, an intensive culture. The freeze drying of the eggs. And is it me or are those the flimsiest hazmat suits ever invented? Let's put on some shower curtains before we go into the hazardous area. And then the exploding rat. And by the way, the lady dude from the Pentagon, she says, get Hilton from the University of Michigan. He's an expert on mutation. If you put a line like that in a movie, shouldn't you eventually see Hilton from the University of Michigan? Not in this movie. Hilton never appears unless maybe it's Hilton who's in this next scene about how the eggs must come from outer space because they're silicon-based eggs and Earth is carbon-based. Oh, I'm sorry. Spoiler alert. I'm giving away key points of exposition because there's more exposition coming. All right. I know you're dying to get into the nitty-gritty of green gooey egg biology, so let's roll the film. Is full of super secret organizations that have unlimited surveillance capabilities and are able to order up paramilitary armies at a moment's notice. Like the character of Stella Holmes. She's the colonel in charge at Special Division 5. No American writer would invent a place called Special Division 5. But these European writers, they always have these scenarios where Secret Lab 47 is studying the effects of outer space radiation and preparing a voyage to Pluto, and they only answer to the president, and they're totally secret. Nobody can find out that Secret Lab 47 exists. And they assume Americans can do this, but no other country can, which is good. Because the next time we get into a conflict with France, we can just say, don't make me call in Attack Force 367 from our secret underground base in Malta. I don't want to do that. And believe me, you don't want me to do that. Because we have trillions of dollars for our military. We actually do for our military, but we already spent it all on the F-35 fighter plane. Are they even flying those things yet? It takes us 30 years to build a new piece of warfighting equipment. And then by the time that happens, everybody who might be willing to attack us is dead. So we say, well, it's a versatile piece of equipment. We still need it. We can use it. We'll use it down on the southern border to protect against Mexico. Too many Mexicans sneaking across. We just invent reasons that we still need it.
Okay, next segment break for contamination. 45 minutes. Just want to see something real quick as well. Looks like about 20 more minutes after this.
Did I just watch a scene where the emasculated astronaut gets his penis back by slapping the bitch colonel across the face and making her see the reality that he's an egg yolk? I think that's what I just watched. That's Louise Marlowe in the role of the no-nonsense colonel in charge. To give you some idea what kind of nice guy Luigi Cozzi is, he complained publicly that he wanted to hire Caroline Munro for that part, or someone, quote, as young as Caroline Munro in 1979, but his producer disagreed and said the female lead should be older, and so this is a quote from Luigi: "I was forced to hire someone older and ugly." I'm sure Louise Marlowe was thrilled with that assessment from her own director. Louise is a Montreal actor, almost all of them Canadian. So the way this movie happened, Luigi Cozzi, or Louis Coates, is one of the lesser-known horror directors in Italy. He's the only one who started out as a distributor. He had a little company that distributed American and British horror films in Europe. Films Creeping Unknown, Day of the Triffids. And he made a lot of money doing that. And he figured he would make a movie of his own. And so the movie he made was Star Crash in 1979. It was a ripoff of Star Wars, of course, and it made $16 million, making it the biggest grosser for Roger Corman's New World Pictures that year. So now it's time for his second movie. An Alien has just come out, so Cozzi decides he'll make an Alien ripoff. And he starts writing the script for the very movie we're watching, only the title of it is Alien Arrives on the Earth. He thought that was a great title. He figured he didn't have the money to do the outer space sequences, like the Ridley Scott movie, so he would bring the eggs down to Earth. But he was having trouble with the producers in Rome who were putting up the money. First of all, they didn't like sci-fi. They wanted it to be more of a James Bond thriller.
Pretty interesting, too, how we're talking about an Alien ripoff here with the movie Contamination. And just recently, Alien Romulus did come out. Alien Romulus is actually pretty good, if anybody gets a chance to see it.
And one producer in particular said he didn't want the word alien in the title because he didn't want it to seem like a copy, even though all they were doing was making a copy. So that particular producer was in the process of making a ripoff of the China Syndrome, because the Italians will rip off anything, including Jane Fonda movies. And so the title of that movie was going to be Contamination. And when the deal for that movie fell through, he said, I like this title, let's just use Contamination for the Alien movie. So Luigi Cozzi proudly calls this movie the illegitimate son of Alien. I think it would be better described as the attempted mating with Alien resulting in an abortion. At any rate, they started casting the movie from Luigi Cozzi's offices that he shared on Via Carancini in Rome with two other production companies. And one of those production companies consisted of the guys who made Zombie 2, which was, of course, a ripoff of Dawn of the Dead. Hence, they called it Zombie 2, even though there was no Zombie 1, because they wanted people to think it was a sequel to Dawn of the Dead. Lucio Fulci was the director of Zombie 2, and he kept talking about how much money they made on it. Billions of lira, which is like tens of dollars. And so Cozzi's people decided to use the same cast from Zombie 2 for Contamination. And in fact, Cozzi decided to steal a bunch of other stuff from Zombie 2, like the whole opening scene, including some of the almost verbatim dialogue. But the only cast member from Zombie 2 who would agree to be in Contamination was Ian McCulloch. And so, of course, he was cast in the best role as the disgraced alcoholic astronaut. Ian McCulloch not only starred in Zombie 2, which was called Zombie Flesh Eaters in Europe, but he was also the lead in Dr. Butcher MD, one of the first movies I ever reviewed. That's the title I knew it by. Some call it Zombie Holocaust. Ian McCulloch has battled against zombies, mad doctors, cannibals, aliens. He's a professional crusader against unlikely scourges of the earth. And then for the cop, Cozzi cast Marino Massei as Lieutenant Tony Aris, veteran Italian character actor. He was in Luchino Visconti's classic The Leopard. He was in Godfather Part 3. But as a Brooklyn cop, come on, you couldn't find an unemployed Italian-speaking actor who was actually from Brooklyn, please. And then in the Ice Mountain flashback there that you saw, the other astronaut, Hamilton was played by Siegfried Rau, one of the most popular actors in Germany for many decades. He died just last year. He never left Europe, so we only know him from bit parts in The Eagle Has Landed and Patton. But he made many German movies and TV shows and was a beloved guy. He always played a heavy in non-German movies because, you know, we always had that demand for good Nazis. So in some of these scenes, you had actors speaking Italian, English, French, and German all in the same scene, and then they dubbed over it in English in post-production. All right, back to the movie. Help us save this frail planet. Slap. He whacks her across the face when she says that. Like, stand aside, woman. You know? The thing about all these alien come-to-Earth movies is that the aliens always have hostile intentions. What if they reversed it, and the aliens are just bopping through the universe in the spaceship equivalent of a Mustang convertible, and they find us, and so they come down to be friendly and shoot the breeze, but the common cold can kill them in an instant. So we are the ones who are diseased enemies of their civilization. Actually, that's kind of what happened to half the native peoples of the Caribbean and the North American mainland. So yeah, we don't like that story, do we?
Next segment break. 1 hour and 2 minutes.
So every time an egg dies, Hamilton gets a brain jolt and becomes really cranky with his staff. One thing I forgot to mention last break about the Luigi Cozzi philosophy of directing is that he dresses all of his actors in what he calls neutral clothes, or boring generic clothes that you can't place in any particular decade. He uses old cars, eccentric old cars, so you won't be able to instantly tell what year the movie was made. This is his effort to be, in his words, quote, timeless. I want my movies to be timeless so that when you're watching them 30 years from now, that would be hysterically funny and illustrate the silly arrogance of Luigi Cozzi, except here we are watching it 30 years later, almost 40 years later. Okay, the shower sequence. Numero uno. Doesn't it seem like it goes on for 45 minutes? Numero two-o. Are we supposed to think that Hubbard and Lieutenant Harris are fighting over who gets to make a move on Colonel Holmes, even though nobody is really making a move on Colonel Holmes? Numero three-o. Who stops to take a shower when you only have 48 hours until the end of the world? And numero four-o. Who in the history of horror goes to the trouble to stage a shower scene and doesn't show any skin whatsoever? Luigi really did not like her, did he? And by the way, this movie was on the banned list in the UK. This was one of the 74 so-called video nasties that were listed by the official censor at the British Film Classification Board as being unfit for Brit consumption. It's hard to see why exactly, other than that they were just gunning for anything that came out of Italy. Luigi was a friend of Dario Argento, and he wrote several things for him. He wrote Four Flies on Grey Velvet. He also directed Hercules, not to be confused with another movie he directed called The Adventures of Hercules. Both of those starred Lou Ferrigno. And Cozzi said both of those were science fiction movies in disguise, since he claims that nobody would let him make science fiction anymore after Contamination came out. Wonder why. He was also somehow involved with the story for Devilfish, the monster shark movie made by Lamberto Bava. He has story credit on that, even though that movie has no story. And he directed Demon 6, De Profundis, in 1989. I have no idea which demons that is. I get them all mixed up. All right, it seems like a long time since we had any exploding stomachs, and I miss those exploding stomachs. So, all right, back to the movie. Hey, you know what we can do? Use a 1952 Studebaker in this movie set in 1980, so that when people watch it in 2020, it'll seem modern. Or maybe it will just seem nonsensical, because nonsensical never goes out of style. Yes, the Cyclops. Of course there's a Cyclops. That's exactly what this movie needed. I have a question, though. Who's the star of this movie? Is it Colonel Stella Holmes, who just kissed the grubby Brooklyn cop in one of the most bark-worthy scenes ever devised? Is it Tony Harris, the cop who first finds the eggs? Is it Hubbard, the astronaut who saw the green eggs on Mars and is now flying a single-engine plane all over the zombies in hazmat suits carrying ripened green eggs ensconced in handheld The fact is, there is no real star because who could like any of these people? And who decides that the future of civilization depends on a headstrong, humorless, sexless colonel, a confused, wimpy cop from Brooklyn, and a blubbery, alcoholic astronaut? And by the way, the reason the two astronauts are named Hubbard and Hamilton is that Luigi Cozzi wanted to pay tribute to his two favorite science fiction writers, L. Ron Hubbard and Edmund Hamilton. And you'll notice that L. Ron Hubbard is the good astronaut. What else can I say before we approach the stupefying conclusion of this movie? Oh yeah, the music is by The Goblin. Not Goblin, The Goblin. Because the band called Goblin that Dario Argento used in Suspiria and other movies had broken up. The leader, Claudio Simonetti, had gone solo. So good move, Claudio. How did that work out for you? And so the remaining members of Goblin became The Goblin. And the babe sidekick of astronaut Hamilton is Gisela Hahn, who is from Slovakia. But since she was born in 1943, she's a German citizen. And Gisela not only had a spread in Playboy, she had one of the larger roles in the immortal Italian sex comedy When Men Carried Clubs and Women Played Ding Dong. 1971 classic. We all remember that. Okay, so Luigi Cozzi says the inspiration for this film was Alien, duh. But he didn't want to copy Alien, so he copied Enemy from Space, the second movie in the Quatermass series from Britain. And then he took stuff from Invasion of the Body Snatchers and Them, and as we pointed out, he even took some stuff from Zombie 2 because he didn't want to be a copycat and just imitate Alien. All right, back to the movie. And if you're wondering why these guys never get sued, I mean, they're appearing in documentaries saying, yeah, I stole this and I stole that and I stole this other thing. The reason they don't get sued, I think, is Italian court. You ever seen an Italian court? Nobody wants that. Nobody's going to go into court in Rome and sue for copyright infringement. It'll take you 9 years and then they'll pay you in lira, which is like monopoly money, only less valuable. It's like Silvio Berlusconi, right? The prime minister. How many times was Silvio Berlusconi the prime minister? At least 4 times. And it's like abuse of office charges, innocent. Bribery of senators charges, innocent. Defamation case against a leader of the opposition party, innocent. Soliciting minors for sex, innocent. Illegal campaign finance, innocent. Tax fraud, false accounting, embezzlement. And what it comes down to is, you want to sue Berlusconi? Get in line, you know? And so if you want to sue one of the 40 Italian filmmakers that steal stuff, get in line. So you just go, what the hell? Forget it. Just forget it, like Barney Fife. Just forget it.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, ghosts and goblins, witches and wizards, vampires and werewolves. This is after the end credits.
The problem they had with the one-eyed Martian creature that takes over people's minds and then swallows them whole is that it was a mechanical creature. It was supposed to move, and it had pumps and tentacles and optical effects and stop-motion animation, but none of those special effects were authorized by the producers, and none of the mechanical effects worked. So it basically became this giant piece of cardboard, and anytime they needed it to move or animate, somebody would have to lift up that part of it and make it move. And that's why they emphasized the whole mind control thing. Since the monster is incapable of moving towards the victim has to move toward it. So anyway, the moment I was waiting for is the moment when Stella asked Hamilton, what's the purpose of the evil plan? And his answer is to grow, to survive. The strongest creature shall crush the weakest. And then he swears his allegiance to the superior being, the Cyclops. So no idea. It doesn't really sound like much of a motive to me. It sounds like a self-help course, you know, to grow and to survive. Or Denise Austin doing the 5 a.m. workout on the beach in Maui. I'm Denise Austin. Work those hips. We're growing. We're surviving. Obey the Cyclops. Anyhow, Contamination premiered in the city of Bologna in August of 1980 on the day that a bomb exploded at the Bologna train station, which didn't augur well for people being in a party mood and wanting to hit the contamination red carpet that night. So the result was that the movie was a total bomb in Italy. However, I just made a pun, didn't I? But however, the movie was seen by Menahem Golan, the flamboyant owner of Cannon Films, and he brought it to the United States and removed 11 minutes of gore so he could get an R rating, and he released it under a new title, Alien Contamination. In all countries other than America, it was marketed as a sequel to Alien, which was not a novel idea in Italy because they did the same thing with another Italian movie called Alien 2, on Earth. That movie has no relation to this movie. And after this experience, Luigi Cozzi made a few other movies that he called science fiction in disguise. And then when it became impossible to make those in the 90s, he retired from filmmaking and took over the management of his friend Dario Argento's bookstore. Now, that bookstore is called Profondo, which is, of course, the Italian name for the Argento movie we know as Deep Red. And in the basement of the bookstore are all the props from all of Dario Argento's movies. But above ground is Luigi Cozzi himself, who will sell you a book. And come on over here, Darcy.
Darcy, ladies and gentlemen. Darcy, the lovely male girl.
Bookstore. It has the Grim Reaper on the cover. How do I know that it's from that store? Because Darcy, the mail girl, went to that store and you bought me that book.
I did.
So you never told me that you were going there, but you went to Rome and you bought a book from Luigi Cozzi himself. He sold you the book. You actually talked to Luigi Cozzi.
I didn't actually know who he was. So my kid was with me and he was like, oh, that's the guy that made Star Crash.
Okay, so you said, oh, wow, Star Crash, Luigi Cozzi is here.
Yeah, basically. I mean, I didn't know the director's name, but Star Crash I love, so all in.
So basically your conversation consisted of, that'll be $14.95 for the book.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. That was a thrilling story, Darcy. And thanks for the book, even though I don't speak Italian. It seems to be a book-length treatment of the films of Joe D'Amato. Mm-hmm. And you remember that the first film I ever reviewed was a Joe D'Amato film called Anthropophagus, released in this country as The Grim Reaper.
You're very welcome. And since this is International Night, we have a letter from Australia.
Oh, okay. I've been hearing from Australia because they can't get the show over there.
Yeah, actually, this person gets the show and loves the show.
No less driving in Australia.
Let's say Batchet of Henley Beach, South Australia.
Okay. Hi, Joe, Bob, and team. Firstly, I just wanted to thank you for your Shudder live streams. As an 18-year-old in Australia, I never got the opportunity to experience drive-in hosts, and these live stream marathons and the associated group chats have been a wonderful experience in communal viewing. I love how passionate and knowledgeable you are about horror films. That passion is just so contagious and so fun. And then she asked for the Texas Chainsaw article, which I will send to her. And I think it's a she. Caitlin is a she name, right?
It was a female, yeah.
All right, Caitlin. Well, thank you for finding the show, which is not available in Australia. So great work. And we love that level of dedication here at Last Drive-In. When people in Sweden or Russia or Asia complain that they can't get the show, I don't even know how they find out about the show. I always tell them, always a way to get the show. Don't do anything illegal, but we won't turn you in if you do. Right, Darcy?
Our secret stays with us.
Okay. How did you like Rome?
It was beautiful.
Did you go to the Castle Freak house?
No, because we hadn't done that show yet and I didn't know it was there.
Well, ask your son, because, I mean, you have a son who recognized Luigi Cozzi on sight. Luigi Cozzi on sight. So ask your son, where should we go today horror-wise? And apparently he'll know.
You honestly have no idea how close to the truth that is.
All right. Well, did I tell you the one about the rich guy in the limo who saw two homeless guys eating grass? A man is riding in a limousine, and he sees two men eating grass by the roadside. So he orders his driver to stop, and he gets out of the car, and he says, "Why are you eating grass?" And the guy says, "Well, we don't have any money for food." And so the rich guy says, "Well, come along home with me then." And the homeless guy says, "Well, no, sir, I have a wife and two children." "Well, bring them along too." And then he looks at the other homeless man. He says, you come along with us as well. And the second homeless guy says, but I have a wife and 6 children, sir. We'll bring them along as well. And so all these people climb into the car, which is kind of difficult because there are now 11 people in addition to the driver. But it's a large limo, and so they all get inside. And they're driving to the rich guy's home. And the first homeless guy says, sir, you are too kind. Thank you for taking all of us with you. And the rich guy says, no, you're more of a blessing to me than I am to you. And the second homeless guy says, how are we poor people a blessing to you, sir? And the rich guy says, the grass at my house is about 2 feet tall. Tall.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, ghosts and goblins, witches and wizards, vampires and werewolves. That is going to do it for tonight's watch along with Joe Bob on The Last Drive-In. I'll catch you on the next one, chat. Could possibly even be tomorrow. But right now, I'm going to get ready to watch All Elite Wrestling. AEW Wednesday night. Okay. Until next time. Peace, God.